And we're going to see that the leaders who are very self-aware and know how to build strong bonds with others and build community, specifically community, are going to be the most successful. Because we used to talk a lot about creating a family feel in the office, in the workplace, that, you know, it's like our family. I don't think that's the right analogy. It's a community, and it should be treated that way. And so we need to be focused on building and shaping and forming and nurturing communities.
Welcome everyone to the first episode of the High Performance Teams podcast. Today we have the awesome Heather Hansen. She's a global communication specialist, trainer, TEDx speaker, and author. Currently residing in Singapore, she's the founder of Global Speech Academy, a communications training and consulting firm. Her 2018 TEDx titled 2 Billion Voices, How to Speak Bad English Perfectly has had over 150,000 views. Her newest book, Unmuted, was just released and has hit the bestsellers list in Singapore. Heather, I am so excited having you as my first guest at the podcast. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Very excited to be here. It's a momentous occasion.
Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you.
Right. So let's start by understanding the backstory. Can you tell us a little bit about you and the backstory?
Okay, well, I'm originally from California in the States, born and raised there. I left 20 years ago this year and have lived primarily in Denmark and Singapore. So raised in the US, married to a Dane, have had 8 years there, and then have had 12 years in Asia. So I've had a lot of my own international experiences and a lot of multicultural experiences that have led to me feeling muted in some situations, unmuted in others, and having a lot of interactions with all different kinds of people and businesses. And then when the pandemic hit, and we all started moving online into virtual spaces, and every single conversation we were hearing, you're on mute, you're on mute, you're on mute. And then it kind of hit me one day, you know, we've been on mute for a long time in a lot of different ways. There have been people muting themselves in their companies, in their meetings, in their families, in their communities. And I think it's time now, as we are re-entering the world in this new reawakening, that we press unmute, that we start speaking up, that we build a new world that's better than the one that we had pre-pandemic. And I think we're ready for that now. And so that was really the foundation of Unmuted, of how do we now show up, speak up, and inspire action in this new world and make it better than what we've seen in the past.
So let's understand the new world. So what's the context that is happening today? And what are the challenges that leaders are facing?
Yeah, well, I think that, and everyone is talking about it, I mean, the great resignation and everyone leaving and trying to retain talent is a really huge concern and challenge for a lot of leaders. And more than a resignation, it really is this new awakening. People have had time to reflect on what they want in their lives, and showing up for a job that they don't really care about or feel like there's purpose involved. I think a lot of people aren't willing to do that anymore. And they know that they can find other places where they can get what they need. So for leaders especially, this is a huge shift that we're seeing in leadership. And we saw this before the pandemic, I think, but even more so now, that leaders need to show up with a purpose, with passion, and be able to inspire their people to have greater innovation, to really listen to them, to acknowledge them, to lead with empathy. And we saw this happening before, but I think the pandemic really crystallized this. And we're going to see a new kind of leadership coming forward now.
But why do you think that is happening with the leaders? Why they are struggling?
It's kind of funny, you know, where we went online, now we're going back into the office, and it's like we've forgotten how to be human, you know? This is just basic people skills, human skills, interaction, building trust, showing empathy. These are things that should come really natural to us, and yet we've kept them out of business and out of the workplace for so long. I think a lot of people are a little bit scared to show up in that way. And feel like, well, if I show empathy or if I'm vulnerable, am I still a strong leader? And I think these things are not mutually exclusive, right? We can be human and normal, regular people with all the faults as well, and be strong leaders as well.
I heard you talking about vulnerability, and sometimes when you talk with your customers about vulnerability, how you get sometimes pushback. I find it very interesting. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes, I do. I get that a lot, actually, where I'll say, you know, it's time for us to show more vulnerability, to share more of our stories, more of ourselves. And I will get a lot of pushback saying, no, but I mean, look up vulnerability in a dictionary. It's weakness. It's feeling weak. It's feeling vulnerable. And I think that we've really changed this definition over time, that vulnerability absolutely is not a weakness. It's a way of connecting and building rapport. And it isn't putting out all of your faults on the table either. It's just being honest about how you're showing up in the world. And that's what people resonate with. That's what people think, oh gosh, wow, okay, so I am like you. Like, I can do what you're doing. I can step up to that level, and I can contribute more because I know that I'm not perfect and I could never be as good as you, right? We have all these kinds of negative self-talk going on in our teams, and that's holding people back from pressing that unmute button and showing up fully. So when we are showing as leaders that, you know, I'm not perfect either, you know, yeah, if I have to speak in front of 100 people, I shake too, and people think, oh, no, not you, you know, but everybody has nerves, everybody feels insecure at times, and if we don't share these stories, I think it's very difficult for people to relate to us and to want to follow us and to feel inspired by us. So that's going to be a major shift that we're seeing now, that leaders are showing up, sharing more of their stories, their not necessarily personal lives, but being more open about their challenges and their struggles, and showing that we're all human, which is really what it's all about. Yeah.
And following that, also in your TEDx, which, by the way, I really recommend you to watch your TEDx. You speak about something which for me was a kind of an awakening, an eye-opener, which is the bias on the accents that we have, and how millions of people are not maybe fulfilling their full potential because of a bias that's happening with the accent. Can you tell us more about that, and what are the implications of that?
Yeah, this is something that I think needs to be talked about a lot more. We aren't talking about it. When we look at diversity and inclusion, we're really focused on, you know, gender, race, ethnicity, sexuality, all of these things, but we forget about language. And when we do talk about language, we're talking about inclusive language. So don't say you guys if there's women in the room, for example. And that's all very important, but we forget that within the language itself, there's an extreme amount of bias. And those of us born into English, like myself, are very privileged in the world. We go into global business, and the world speaks global business, or global English, right? And we have that as our native language. So we are not struggling as much in the meeting to find the right words, or wonder if we're pronouncing it correctly, or if the grammar's right, and all of those things. Then on top of that, whether you're a native or non-native speaker, it doesn't even matter, because we do this within the US, within the UK. The minute you hear someone open their mouth, you have already decided how educated they are, what socioeconomic class they're from, what their background is, what their skin color is. You can hear that based on the accent. Or maybe you misjudge. So for example, I have a very good friend, colleague here in Singapore, African American, spoken on the phone with a VP many, many times, showed up at his office for the first time, and his first reaction was, oh, you didn't sound black on the phone, right? And that to me is shocking. It's shocking. So in his mind, you know, when you hear a voice, you're putting together this picture of what that person's like, what they sound like. I mean, if anyone who is only listening to our conversation as a podcast and they don't know what I look like, they're thinking, where is she from? She sounds American, maybe Canadian, because she speaks clearly. And most Americans, you know, we have these dialects that can mumble a little bit more. People sometimes can't place me because I've changed my accent a lot living abroad 20 years. I go home, they say I talk funny. So what happens when we put all these elements into the workplace is that we know, and we have studies showing, unfortunately, that you could be a hiring manager and could be discriminating against someone because they have an accent that's different to yours. And because of the biases you have, because of where you grew up, because of media, movies that you've seen, you can have a negative impression of that person based on the accent that they're bringing to the table. And that signals them as an other, someone who doesn't belong. And then you have difficulty connecting with them. Or you think, oh, it's too hard to understand them. Or, oh, I'm too tired listening to them. And you start to switch off. You don't hear the message anymore. And so this is having a really strong effect on hiring decisions, on promotion decisions. I mean, I've built a whole business based on this. People calling me and saying, fix this person, the communication skills, which a lot of times is just their accent's too heavy, we can't understand him. And it's a two-way process, right? So we need to be tuning our ears as well, and our world is becoming so global that we need to become more used to hearing different kinds of accented varieties of English so that it's more normalized and that we hear different varieties, because we tend to hear the standard varieties in the media, even if they are spoken by minority groups. And that's a big, big problem. And we aren't really thinking about it or talking about it in the workplace. Yeah.
Another this is so it's so important. It's so important. And there's another one I want to go deeper, because in your book, in the first part, you talk about conscious communication, and you say that the first step to have effective communication is that people are more aware about themselves, that we are more mindful about our perceptions. And to be honest, that resonated a lot with me. But on the other side, also I see this is so big in terms of problem. So can you tell what is exactly happening in the workplace in this topic?
Yeah. It really does start with that self-awareness piece, because many of us are not aware of the biases that we have. And we don't even realize it when we say something like, you guys, going back to the inclusive communication. I mean, I was raised with you guys as a term that includes everyone. And it's only in the past few years that I've realized, okay, I guess I have to change this, right? Because I've never taken it as that way. I don't feel like if you said that, you're not including me. But there are plenty of people who do feel that way. So we need to start being aware of that. And that's one form of inclusion. But the biases run so much deeper than that. It can be cultural differences. It can be communication styles. It can be how you relate to power and hierarchy. The cultures that we are here in Asia, and we're talking about trying to unmute the workplace. Well, there are some people that you can tell them a million times, please just come to me with your ideas. I want to hear them. Just tell me what you think. And that person will never come to you. They will never do that, because they will feel like, no, that's disrespecting you as a leader, and I don't do that. I expect you to have the ideas, and I don't want to challenge those ideas. And because if I share a different idea, that might challenge you or make you feel like I'm being disrespectful. And so we have to find a way to create this psychological safety in an Asian context, which I think is a very different challenge than talking about psychological safety in the West. I mean, we have to be culturally appropriate in how we're adapting. Even a lot of the ideas and things I encourage in the book, we need to be very careful how we then apply them in different contexts. And that starts with that self-awareness of knowing, who am I? What do I value? Why do I want them to speak up? Am I trying to get them to do something that is much more comfortable for me in my culture but may not be for them? How can I approach this in a different way? Do I need to, for example, give them an agenda beforehand? Do I need to speak to them privately? There are a number of suggestions in the book as well around how we can do that.
Okay, so now let's look a bit more to the future. So that we see, so what's ahead of us? How do you see the future at the workplace before we go into solutions? So let's first understand what's the future.
Well, I think we will be very much hybrid moving forward. I mean, right now here in Singapore, we're 75% back in the office. We know that lots of people still want to be at home. There are people fighting this idea of having to go back. A lot of companies are coming up with brand new policies. I think all of our companies are going to become much more global. That's, I think, one good thing that came of the pandemic, is that when we moved online, we could suddenly include many more people. So instead of an executive committee meeting quarterly, maybe yearly. Some of them were meeting monthly because suddenly it wasn't as important to get everyone on a plane and fly them to the same location and sit them down. They realized, wait, we can actually do this on Zoom. Why haven't we been doing this all along? And that brought new challenges because sometimes they found out, wait a second, what are you doing? Why are you doing it that way in that country? And why aren't you doing it like this? And actually, I'm not sure I like you very much, all these cultural differences came up to the surface suddenly, and that created some challenges. But the good side of that was we were able to bring the world together. And I think that's going to continue. I think even if you're sitting in your living room in my hometown in California, the world is coming to you. And we need to be ready for that. I think a lot of people need to build the skills in cross-cultural intelligence, that they need to become more self-aware. The conscious communication piece you brought up is going to become more important. And we need to gain the skills to understand how to operate in these hybrid environments. And that's inclusion on another level. We're struggling being inclusive with the people sitting in front of us. And then how do we also include people through the screen? How do we remember to that there are people that aren't in the room? And that's where I've seen huge, huge challenges for teams in knowing how to manage that hybrid space and include people who are not in the space itself. So the future is interesting, I think, from a communication perspective. And I mean, we haven't even gone to the whole metaverse, online, speaking through avatars. I mean, that I think will also happen down the road. And it's going to be a flashback to a lot of what we're doing now in the pandemic with cameras off and voice only, where we won't necessarily see people's faces or facial expression, and how will we navigate that? So I think that my industry as a communication professional, I have a lot of work to do over the next decade because we are learning and changing and growing constantly, and it's going to have a massive impact on business and how we operate.
So in terms of communication, what has been the biggest changes that COVID has brought to us?
Probably the modes of communication, so us getting more comfortable being on a camera, knowing how to talk to a camera, being able to create inclusive environments online, which I think a lot of people are still struggling with. We've gotten better, but a lot of people still can't do that well. And so these are the biggest shifts and challenges. People feeling, in some cases, more disconnected, but in other cases, more connected, which is an interesting paradox. And it's been very individual when I've talked to different leaders. Some leaders have done this very well, and they're like, no, this is great, we're doing wonderful. Others just feel like everything's fallen apart, they can't get back to the office fast enough. So there's really been huge differences I've seen across the board among my clients and industries, but definitely challenging,
Well, can you elaborate more on what you said, that in terms of more connection? On one side, people are more connected, but on the other side, more disconnected?
Well, it depends on who you ask, right? I think a lot of people who feel more introverted kind of liked the online space because they could keep their camera off and they could press mute when they needed to, and they could participate at a level where they felt comfortable and they didn't feel like they were always on the spot. They could also be negatively affected if they were in an environment that forced cameras on at all times, even in a group of 50 people. And so I think it depended on the management, what kind of rules were put in place for these meetings. But some people did really feel like they could become more connected. I mean, we also saw at the same time the birth of these chat-based networking groups, right? Things like Clubhouse or Twitter Spaces. And a lot of people felt that just the voice only, they could build stronger relationships than they did online. And in fact, some studies that were done during the pandemic were showing people returned to their normal telephones and started using them as telephones, not as like social media scrolling, but they actually started using their phones more because it gave you the freedom to be going around your house or doing something while you talked, or you could be hands-free. And what we found is that you can feel emotion more when the visual is taken away. So when you're just listening to voice, you sometimes can have an even better emotional connection. You can feel the person more. You feel their emotion, and it creates a stronger, more authentic bond. And that's why I'm kind of excited about the ideas of metaverse and us being behind avatars and things like that, because if we go back to voice only, we might find that we build some stronger emotional connections. And I mean, I don't know about you, you were on Clubhouse for a while, and I was too during like maybe a 6-month phase there. And some of the people I met there, they are the strongest connections I've ever met in a social media space. So different than like typing back and forth on LinkedIn or whatever, right? So there is definitely something to that, but I think that's why some people felt like, wow, they felt more connected. They were reaching out to people they hadn't spoken to in years, having Zoom calls with family across the world. Everybody learned how to use the tools better, so they were more comfortable, and in that case could be more connected. But then others used it as a way to disconnect themselves and couldn't find a way to engage, or felt forced by companies into situations they were uncomfortable with, and then it created more disconnection. So as we move back in, I think we need to be very mindful of all of this, of how are we designing the spaces in the hybrid world. How are we running our meetings? How are we including? How do we do the setup in the offices? I think a lot of offices now have decided to build full-on studios and boardrooms that have a lot more screen space to bring people in, so you can see, you know, your remote colleagues. So this is all going to happen, whether we want it to or not. It's already happening. Yeah.
So we have a new world. Let's say, like, we have a new world. There's many challenges, but there's a huge opportunity for us to create something new, to innovate. Yeah. And I'm so happy that you've been working a lot. I know you've been working hard, and you brought like a muted. So now let's move into like, so what do you think is the solution? So I know that you wrote a book, which I really enjoyed and I really recommend. So can you tell us about, so what's the solution? So how Unmuted can help leaders better lead their teams?
Yeah. So in Unmuted, it's based on a framework, which is your good old Venn diagram, right? 3 circles. And the first is the conscious communication, which we've spoken about quite a bit, the self-awareness, cross-cultural communication, knowing how to connect and build those bridges. Then we have confident communication, which is both self-confidence but also skills confidence. So the typical response when there is a communication challenge in the workplace is, you know, get a trainer in and give them better presentation skills training, or how to run a virtual meeting, or all those things. And that training is important, but often we're just treating the symptom and not the causes underneath. So I think that's the last step after we have looked at the conscious communication, and the third area, which is connected communication. So that's about creating that psychologically safe environment, using our human skills to connect with one another. If they do not have all 3 areas, it's really hard to be unmuted. If they don't have the self-confidence and know that their message is meaningful, then they probably won't speak up. If they are feeling very connected and are also confident, but they aren't conscious, then they're probably too loud and they're speaking over everyone in the meeting, and they aren't very aware that they're not including others. So we need all 3 pieces of this puzzle. And I think that when we start by looking at the conscious and connected pieces, before we just jump to a training solution, for example, we can treat the real causes of the lack of communication in the organization before we try to build the skills, which is really the very last piece of the puzzle, in my opinion.
And what has been so far the feedback from leaders when you introduced it to them?
Well, we are still, it's difficult because training and development is usually an HR function. And then if we want to look at culture change, that's often at a different level, different department, right? And so we have to really start looking at this from the top with the leaders. If the leaders are not creating a space that encourages people to share their ideas, then we know right away that's not going to happen. And I think a lot of companies don't really realize where the problem is, and we're measuring a lot of the wrong things. So we measure all the demographics, you know, we measure how many males and females, and are we ethnically diverse and cognitively diverse, and we look at all of these measurements, but we don't actually look at the connections in the company. So we need to start mapping these social networks in the company to find out where the problems are, then dig deeper to see how to solve them. And is it a cultural issue? Is it a self-awareness issue? Is it a leadership issue? And the sad part is, even among leadership, there's usually very poor communication, is what I've found. And then that's being modeled all the way down. So we have to work from the top and create those safe spaces. But at the same time, I think anybody in the company can be a leader. And we can see in those social maps that there are certain influencers who could be tying that company together, and they are generally not in leadership. And so by finding who those people are, you can also start building stronger relationships and environments where this can thrive.
So what do you expect to achieve with Unmuted? What do you think will be the impact?
Oh, well, I hope that the impact is that we are creating these more human-centered environments and workplaces, that we can make this transition back into the workplace a smoother one, where we are thinking about the human side of our relationships, that we're going further than just, did you get the job done, but also, how's it actually going for you right now, and is this okay? I think when people aren't meeting targets, it's like, well, why aren't you meeting your targets? Instead of realizing, well, this is odd. Of course they want to meet their targets. Nobody goes to work and it's like, I just don't care. If possibly, yes, then they're in the wrong place and wrong job. But typically, if you're not meeting your targets, you're just as upset about that, and there's probably something wrong. There's probably something going on in that person's life, in their world. Maybe it's work-related, maybe it isn't, but there needs to be a conversation about that instead of jumping to the, oh, well, why aren't you, what's the problem? Let's look at the KPIs, everything very numbers or financial focused. And that's the difference in the workplace today, is that we're shifting away from that it isn't just about the numbers anymore, it's much more holistic. And so I do hope that with Unmuted, we're going to see people stepping up and sharing their ideas more, that we're going to see more innovation in the workplace, we're going to see more inclusion in the workplace, that we become more self-aware around our own biases and how they are playing out in our relationships in the workplace, and how that also affects the degree to which people share their ideas. So I'm hoping that we can develop a more unmuted world and get some new ideas and new energy in our companies and communities.
So let's get now practical. So I am a leader in my organization. Can you give me 3 tips that I can implement today? So to go in the journey to unmute my organization?
The first one is a big one, and that's about reflecting on your own self-narrative, your own stories. What are your values? What are your values that you actually live and lead, that you can see in your own life? It's about becoming more self-aware around your own cultural biases, what you prefer, your preferences, and how are they maybe different from the culture that you're working in, as in big C, national culture and space that you're in, but also small c cultures around the people you work with. Meaning things like maybe you have children but your coworkers don't. How does that change the way you prioritize things in your life? There are lots of different changes, right? So that self-awareness piece is huge, especially for leaders. If they haven't done work in that area, that's a place to start. Then even more practically speaking, in the workplace itself, as you're putting together meetings and these hybrid events and things like that, many of my clients have found it useful to have a very clear agenda, to be able to send that out before a meeting, and to tell people individually, listen, I would really like to hear your perspective on point 1B, or I would really like you to speak up and share your ideas here. Give them some time to prepare, because not everybody can just walk in a meeting and speak off the cuff, and some people have a lot of anxiety around that, and so preparing them in advance for that is going to be really helpful. And then I would say a third idea, in a meeting itself, we know that not only diverse groups, but groups that have equal talk time are going to come up with the best ideas. And so you can actually try in your group that if you have a certain topic you're discussing, set a timer. Everyone gets 3 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever it might be. Having them, going back to the point 2, it kind of goes with point 3, because if they've written down what they want to say before they go into the meeting, they'll also be more likely to share their real ideas. Because you've probably noticed this in your meetings, you go around the room and someone has a strong voice and is very eloquent and have a really good idea, and then everyone's like, yeah, what he said, what she said, right? Yeah, I agree. But maybe you wrote something very different on your paper before you came in the room, and then that idea is just lost because someone who is very eloquent played into our biases of eloquence is knowledge and leadership and wonderful. And we think, oh, let's go with that. It sounded really good. And that isn't always the best solution. So we want to make sure to bring a variety of solutions to the table. And those are some of the ways we could do that.
Wow, I love that. I think one is about, it's also about belonging, so that everyone feels that can be heard, but also making sure that people really give their ideas and not just follow. So I really love that. Well, I mean, I can spend here like hours with you. It's really an exciting topic. But to finalize, well, ahead we have now a long journey for many leaders. Like, what do you think is going to be one skill or something that a leader, like the one thing that maybe leaders are not even thinking now, but it's going to be critical for them to succeed, let's say in 10 years?
In 10 years, that's a long time frame. We're going to be in metaverse offices by then, possibly. And I think it's going to be understanding self more than anything. I think it's going to start with that conscious communication side of us really working to understand what the biases are that we're carrying, the unconscious biases usually, and how they're playing out in relationships. So it's going to be that ability to build strong relationships, which I think starts there. It starts with self. So the real skill will be building relationships and connection. But how do you do that? It's going to start with self. And we're going to see that the leaders who are very self-aware and know how to build strong bonds with others and build community, specifically community, are going to be the most successful. Because we used to talk a lot about creating a family feel in the office, in the workplace. It's like our family. I don't think that's the right analogy. It's a community, and it should be treated that way. And so we need to be focused on building and shaping and forming and nurturing communities. And that's true in the workplace, it's true at home, it's true in our larger world. And bringing people together around a shared ideal. And that is going to be based on building the relationships, and that is based on having the self-awareness and starting with you. So I think that might be something we maybe aren't thinking about just yet. We're still on the community building and human skills, but we haven't gone all the way back to trickle back to, oh, but it starts with me. And that's really where I think we're going to see us move even more, the self-awareness and probably that self-leadership idea. Yeah.
Wow. Heather, I loved our conversation.
Thanks for having me, Rodrigo. This is great. I'm so excited to see all the people you bring on this podcast and videocast and how you shape the future as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think you are working in such an important topic, and to be honest, I think you're doing an amazing job. So just, keep going, keep inspiring us, and keep unmuting the world.
Thank you. Thanks so much.